Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes is less than 2 weeks away, and a lot of people seem to view Volk as the uncrowned champ and expect him to just cruise right past Diego Lopes. But I think this is a much more competitive fight than people are expecting, and people should be careful sleeping on Diego Lopes. So I want to run through this fight, give my breakdown, and then I'll give my pick towards the end. But I do want to start off by just talking about the danger that Diego Lopes does possess. He is going to have the major power advantage in this matchup. When we're looking at his UFC run, he has a KO win against Pat Sabatini in 1:30. When he took on Sadiq Youssef, who was top 15 at the time, he dropped him multiple times, finished him in under 1:30. And then his most recent fight against Brian Ortega, he hurt Ortega badly, on multiple different occasions. And Ortega is someone who's known for having insane durability. In that first round, he pretty much put him out on the feet and then literally woke him up with the second shot of his combination. So he nearly had a round 1 KO, was still hurting him late in the third round. And that's someone who is able to take a ton of punishment. We've seen him go up against, Max Holloway, recover against Jair. He took a ton of punishment against Volk when they fought. And I think Diego Lopes probably hurt him more than any of those other guys. Yair had him on skates too, but, ended up coming back and finishing that one. Diego Lopes is going to go out. He is going to throw powerful hooks, very powerful uppercuts. He's extremely dangerous in the clinch. He explodes into range pretty effectively, and then also has very solid leg kicks, as we saw in the Ortega fight. And then the other side with Volk, he has legitimate durability questions here. He wasn't necessarily known for having an iron chin before he took on Islam. Max Holloway clipped him a couple of times in their second fight. He got dropped by Chad Mendes, but definitely had, a plus chin. It's tough to become a UFC champ if you don't have at least a solid chin, but he has gone out and been, knocked out cold in back-to-back fights. The Islam Makhachev head kick, and then the Ilia Topuria, knocking him out with the hands. And so I think there's a real question on whether or not he is going to be able to eat Diego Lopes' shots. If Lopes hits him clean, is that light just going to go out like we've seen in his other two fights? He's 36 years old. We know the stats on these champions that are getting above 35 in the lighter weight classes. It is not great. And then I think also just once you start aging, when the reaction time is slightly off, you can just start getting hit more. I think a great example is his teammate, Israel Adesanya. For the vast majority of his title reign, it would be shocking to see Izzy get hit clean. He was just so safe. He was able to see everything so well. Then he gets knocked out by Pereira, gets the belt back, but then he is getting dropped badly to a guy like Sean Strickland. He's getting hurt by DDP. He's getting put out early by Nasruddin Imavov. I don't think the Izzy of, 4, 5, 6 years ago is getting knocked out by those guys, but it can just start to happen once you're getting older. You're not quite as quick. You can kind of get into some bad habits, and that is a concern here for Volkanovski. And one of those bad habits that I do think Volk has gotten himself into is that he has the tendency to retreat with his chin up, and we saw it pretty consistently in the Ilia Topuria fight. And when you do that, especially as the smaller fighter, if you're taller, have a big size advantage, it's definitely more effective. But if you are as small as Volkanovski, you can be very, very vulnerable to extended combinations. That's what we saw against Ilia. And I think that does not line up well with Diego Lopes because he can blitz into range, throwing these, big, powerful hooks. And if Volk still has that habit, I do think that could cost him in this matchup. I think the other advantage that Diego Lopes is going to have is just his submission offense. He's extremely dangerous on the ground. He has 12 wins by submission. We saw in his, I think it was his second fight in the UFC against Gavin Tucker, had the flying triangle into an armbar. So, obviously very slick on the ground. He threatened Movsar Evloev on short notice, against a top 5 guy on multiple occasions. I really don't expect Volkanovski to wrestle, at least early on. Maybe later in the fight, if he has Lopes kind of drained, I could see him, wrestling round 4, round 5. But against a guy like Brian Ortega, who also is very dangerous on the ground, he didn't attempt a single takedown. If he was able to get on top, especially later, he would take it, but he was not trying to wrestle offensively. So even though I do think it's an advantage for Lopes, I don't think it's going to play a huge factor in this matchup. So now let's talk about some of the advantages that Volk does have. I mean, straight up, he is just a truly elite striker. He mixes up his targets super well. He beats up the legs. We saw in the first Max Holloway fight, that was, kind of the separator. I mean, in the third fight, just all around beat him up. He has great use of his lead leg and also mixes the targets there, especially in the Ilya fight. Saw him going to the legs, body, and the head, really kind of mixing it up, just leaving that lead leg out there, really making Ilya Topuria think. He throws well in combination. He effectively switches stances when he is blitzing forward. And then he is also a very, very good counter striker, and he manages range really well. So even though he is on the smaller end, he does just dictate range at a very, very high level. And just technically, like, he is going to be the way cleaner striker. If these guys were even in terms of their power and their durability, like if they just had the same, I think Volk obviously wins this one on the feet, and I don't think it's close. I think he is the way better striker, but those other things are not equal in this matchup. I also think he has the advantage of just having that proven high-level cardio. He gave Islam Makhachev his hardest test, aside from getting knocked out, and round 5 was actually his best round, where he, hurt Islam on the feet, was landing ground and pound. So even up a weight class, getting wrestled by a bigger guy, he still had a ton of cardio to go out and put together a great round 5. He went toe-to-toe with Max Holloway 3 times for 5 rounds. You have to have insane cardio to be able to do that. And then he has gone 5 rounds in the UFC 5 different times. You compare that to Diego Lopes, who has kind of looked winded after some of his 3-round fights. He looked very fatigued in round 3 against Dan Ige. He won round 1, round 2, ended up dropping round 3, still won the decision, but not great that you're fading in a 3-round fight. I will say there were some pretty wild circumstances there where he had to make 145, was cutting down to 145, then Ortega couldn't make it, so then he had to weigh in at 155, and then I guess he had to weigh in again because, you had Dan Ige coming in on short notice. But he is still very dangerous in the 3rd round, as we saw in the Brian Ortega fight. Hurt Ortega bad towards the end of that one, like nearly finished him in the final seconds. And I also think, even though I'm not going to say Diego Lopes has like elite cardio, it's obviously not comparable to Volk. He still has a huge edge. I do think some people can overreact to guys' 3-round cardio because it really is just a completely different fight. First off, training-wise, like, you're probably not putting as much work in terms of the cardio department as you would if you're training for a 5-rounder, but also you are specifically pacing yourself for a 3-round fight. So if you're only going 3 rounds, like, ideally you're pretty much putting everything out there. So I don't think it's totally fair to criticize someone for like being out of gas at the end of round 3 because that's all you are fighting. I think an interesting example of this was Dricus du Plessis, where in a lot of his 3-rounders, like, he was looking gassed towards the end of them, and people were like, Sean Strickland, proven 5-round cardio, how is DDP going to handle that? Is he going to fade in the championship rounds? And you see, he was prepared for it. He didn't fade. When you're gearing up for a 5-round fight, it is just a different animal. So like I said, still give Volk the real edge here, but I'm not going to say it's like a massive concern for Diego Lopes. Now, here are my overall takeaways for this fight. I do think this is going to be a matchup where Volk is going to win the minutes, meaning that he's probably going to be the cleaner guy. I think he's probably going to be outlanding Diego Lopes, but I think Diego Lopes has the upside to have the much bigger moments, and minutes are what's, typically going to win you rounds, but the big moments are really what can cause the finish in these matchups. So I'd be pretty surprised if Diego Lopes was like going out there and outpointing Volkanovski for rounds. I think if he's winning rounds, he's probably winning them on, stinging Volk, hurting him, and then, kind of following up. I think that's how he's winning the rounds. I don't think he's going to go out there and land like 35 significant strikes to Volk's 30. It would just seem unlikely to me. I think the power of Diego Lopes and his explosiveness really scare me if I'm someone who is rooting for Volkanovski in this matchup, especially coming off of those back-to-back knockout losses and being 36 years old. I also think when I was talking about pace, it is tougher to weaponize your cardio when you're going up against someone who does have the danger factor of Diego Lopes. Like Max Holloway, amazing fighter. He doesn't have the one-punch power that Diego Lopes does. Same thing with a guy like Volk, where if you're going to try to put a pace on those guys, you just don't have the same danger factor coming back at you. I still think, though, like, if Volk is getting into round 3, round 4, round 5, I do think that's a spot where he could start to pull away and bank some of those later rounds. So this is a fight I've gone back and forth on. I do think it's very, very close. I think it has the potential to be very, very competitive. I'm not someone who thinks Volk is just going to go out and completely outclass Diego Lopes, but I've actually decided to go with Diego Lopes by knockout. I think if he's knocking him out, I think he's doing it early on, so I'll go round 1 or round 2. He's 30 years old. think he's likely, taking leaps after every fight. I really like that he showed the finishing upside like later in the third round against Ortega. That makes me feel better if this fight does get extended. And I'm just kind of worried this is like the next step of Volkanovski's fall off. Now, this prediction could look bad if like Diego Lopes doesn't find that early shot. If it goes to decision, I'd obviously favor Volkanovski. I do think he could pull away towards the end. I don't think it's impossible for Lopes to win a decision, but if he is winning, I think that's probably the, unlikelier situation. But I'm going to go with Diego Lopes by knockout. I think both these guys are super likable. If Volk gets the belt back, I obviously wouldn't feel bad about it. That would be a great accomplishment. But at this point in their careers, I am slightly leaning towards Diego Lopes. But let me know your guys' thoughts. Do you agree with the prediction? Drop who you think is winning down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.